Norway. We ain't gonna talk about the world leader in education or the most equal country in the world. We're gonna decipher a new Norway, a Norway that is not so sustainable as it seems. Well, Norway wouldn't be the country it is today without oil and gas. Well, your most sustainably developed country is not so sustainable, it seems. Norwegian development is a manifestation of huge oil wealth, perfect economic management of that oil wealth, perfect foster upon the human capital, and of course, beautiful scenery. Norwegian oil and gas is Norway's largest and most important industry. Overall, it accounts for between 40 to 70% of exports. But just how did once a small fishing nation in the North Sea became the 8th largest producer of oil and 3rd largest producer of natural gas in the world? The story takes us back all the way to 1960s. Before 1959, no one had any hopes that Norway's continental shelf would be a major source of oil and gas. This all changed in 1959 when gas was discovered at Groningen in the Netherlands. The first company, Phillips Petroleum, applied in 1962 to explore the North Continental Shelf for possible oil and gas resources. Their offer was seen as an attempt to lock up the entire area for one company. Norway's government rejected this idea and were keen on opening up the resources to several different companies. In 1963, the Norwegian government proclaimed sovereignty over all natural resources in the area and started issuing licenses to explore for potential oil fields. Remember, only to explore, but not to drill. The first oil well in Norway was drilled in 1966, but it was found to be dry. Over the next few years, the same story came from over 200 exploratory drills. Things were looking slightly bleak until 1969. Phillips drilled in Ikovsk. Sorry for my pronunciation, Ikovsk. This would turn out to be one of the major oil fields on the North Continental Shelf. In 1972, Statoil, the Norwegian state-owned oil company, similar to ONGC in India, was established. The company also introduced the principle that 50% of each oil license should be state-owned. The reasoning behind this government ownership was clear. Following on from the decision that oil production should be split among different countries on the North Sea, it was obvious that Norwegian state should be involved. This allowed the government of Norway to directly benefit from the oil and gas activities rather than allowing the profits to disappear abroad. Thanks to the state involvement in the petroleum industry, Norway has experienced an economic surplus every year since the first oil started pumping. As with all other oil exporting countries, including the Gulf, they all faced the dilemma of how to use that oil wealth. Spend today and worry about tomorrow later, or invest for the future. Well, that day, Norway definitely decided to invest smartly, and the Gulf countries went on with the spending then and there on their people, to appease them and seek their consistent support in backing those dictatorial regimes that still survives. But Norway showed the other oil exporters a way to invest smartly. Unlike Venezuela or Gulf countries, in fact, UAE and Saudis today are learning from the Norwegian experience. In fact, all the major developed countries have started their own similar funds as shock absorbers, just similar to Norwegian. Now, another laudable fact about Norwegian oil wealth management was its tax rate on the citizens. As soon as the Gulf countries and Venezuela hit the oil, they eliminated all the income taxes on their citizens. And as you know, abolishing the income taxes makes you question less from your government. And that's how Gulf countries managed their dictatorships. But Norway did something extraordinary. It didn't eliminate any income tax. It kept its taxes intact. And that made them more accountable to their people. And the public at large knew that they had huge pension fund from that oil wealth to fund their old age and healthcare and education. They didn't hesitate in paying such high taxes. Well, Norway has some of the highest taxes in the world. Gulf countries still don't have any income tax, and that's one of the reasons people of the Gulf countries don't question their dictators. And those who happen to levy taxes later on met with brutal responses, like Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein. Well, let's get back to our dear Norway. How Norway invests its oil wealth. One thing we all know about oil is that the price is very volatile. It only takes one producer to increase production and the global prices tumbles. On the other hand, a fire in the major oil field can send the price shooting upwards. If your economy is based on oil, this volatility is a real problem. In fact, this volatility in oil prices actually killed Venezuelan oil-based economy. In 1990, the Norwegian government created the Oil Fund, known today as the Government Pension Fund Global. The purpose of this pension fund is to invest parts of its large surplus from the petroleum industry. This created a significant shock absorber and meant that Norway's economy was not at the mercy of the global oil prices anymore. The fund is managed by a division of the Norwegian Central Bank. It's the largest pension fund in the world. Though clearly it is not a typical pension fund. Instead of being based on individual contributions like National Pension Scheme in India, the Norwegian pension fund is funded by the oil profits. With a value of over $1 trillion in 2019, that's roughly half of India's GDP purchasing power parity. The pension fund owns a lot. It owns a lot. 65% of the portfolio is equities. It means that 65% of pension fund is used to invest in companies globally, with rest of the fund is invested in real estate and fixed investments. Norway invested a small chunk in India's national infrastructure fund. The Norwegian pension fund is also the largest owner of European stock, holding 2.5% of all stocks in the Europe. बेसिकली नॉर्वे क्या करता है कि अपने पेंशन फंड से वो जितना भी ऑयल से उसको प्रॉफिट मिलता है वो उसको पेंशन फंड में डालता है. उस पेंशन फंड को वो दुनिया भर की देशों में कंपनीज में इन्वेस्ट करता है. उससे जो उसको प्रॉफिट होता है वो पेंशन फंड में वापस आके डिपॉजिट हो जाता है. और इससे नॉर्वे के लोगों को क्या फ़ायदा है? उनको वो उसी टाइम पर फ़ायदे नहीं पहुंचाता, उनके लिए वो फ्यूचर सिक्योर कर देता है कि जब आप बुढ़ापे में जाएंगे तो आपको अपने बच्चों के लिए या अपने लिए बुढ़ापे में चिंता करने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. आपको पेंशन सरकार देगी उस प्रॉफिट्स में से जो वहाँ से आपके पैसे वो ऑयल वेल्थ कमाएगी. आपको एजुकेशन की चिंता करने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. आप किसी भी नॉर्वेजियन यूनिवर्सिटी में फ्री में पढ़ सकते हैं. आप नहीं, नॉर्वे का नागरिक. The first ever withdrawal from the pension fund took place in 2016 when the government spent reportedly $780 million from the fund. This was to counter an economic downturn caused by low global oil prices. Now this way it did precisely what it was set up to do. The fund has strong ethical links as well. Since 2004, the pension fund maintains a list of companies that it will not invest into. These are mostly tobacco companies or companies shown to contribute to significant environmental damage. In 2019, somewhat ironically, the fund decided to divest its investment in oil exploration companies. However, the pension fund still invests in petroleum companies such as British Petroleum and Shell that have a significant investment in renewable energy. From 1980 to 1999, oil and gas amounted to 18 to 25% of oil Norwegian exports. In 2000, it jumped to 45% and has been between 40 to 75% of exports ever since. This huge jump came when a number of new oil fields came online, increasing output significantly. And it doesn't make Norway look so environmentally promising as it pretends. Well, development of resources is a sensitive subject globally, especially in Global South, with many environmental groups believing, हाँ भाई चल चल क्या चाहिए चल ले तब हाँ. Well, development of resources is a sensitive subject globally, especially in Global South, with many environmental groups believing the ecosystem is too susceptible to damage. The oil and gas industry has been a boon for Norway as a whole, but there are some towns and cities that have particularly reaped the benefits. Stavanger is known as the oil and gas capital of Europe. its growth to become the third largest city in Norway has been mostly down to the oil and gas industry. Well, what happens when the oil wealth runs out? Like all natural resources, oil and gas are in limited supply. Globally, the debate rages on whether we have passed peak oil or are still approaching it. So far, 47% of recoverable resources on the North Continental Shelf has been pumped out, but a huge 53% of dinosaur juice still lay there. But the one thing that is for sure is that the oil and gas can't flow forever. Over the past few years, we have already started to see a glimpse of life after oil in Norway. Global low oil prices caused a drop in Norway's economy and the loss of many jobs in the oil industry. There has been a recent recovery, though it's a stark reminder that the overall trend is downwards. The Global Pension Fund of Norway is a good start in ensuring the future of Norway's economy. Standing currently at over 300% of Norway's GDP, 300% of Norway's GDP, the country could effectively close for 3 years not to have worry at all. 3 साल के लिए वो कंट्री पूरे लॉकडाउन में जा सकती है और फिर भी उसको कोई नुकसान नहीं होगा. That's how prepared the Norwegian pension fund. This is a nice buffer, but it's not enough for the long term. One other way Norway is well poised for a smooth transition to the post-oil world is that the country itself does not rely heavily on oil and gas. 98% of country's electricity comes from hydropower, and larger number of consumers are choosing electric vehicles. Tesla की ऐश हो रखी है वहाँ पे बढ़िया. Norway also has the goal of emission-free resort and a completely emission-free shipping fleet over the next couple of decades. The shipping fleet accounts for almost all of Norway's oil use. So, as the fleet moves away from oil, the country will definitely benefit. The tourism industry, exploiting Norway's stunningly beautiful landscape, continues to expand and will do so for next 4 more decades. Finally, the former bedrock of economy, the fishing industry, continues to be pretty robust. The Norwegian economy is a perfect example of faking the sustainable economy and lecturing the global south. And it surely seems they aren't as sustainable as they pretend, as their wealth and prosperity owes a great deal to the dinosaur juice. But yes, the Norwegian economy do hold lessons of wealth management for the filthy rich Gulf countries.